In 1789, the most beautiful city in the world burned itself to the ground, not by accident, not by invasion, by choice. Paris in the 1700s was the intellectual capital of earth, the city of Versailles, of Voltaire, of the most extravagant wealth ever assembled in Europe. And yet, by the end of that century, the people of those same streets were carrying severed heads through the city on pikes. How does the most powerful, most beautiful, most intellectually alive city in the world destroy itself from the inside? Walk with us. Forget the Paris of the Eiffel Tower. This was a city of 600,000 people crammed into medieval streets that hadn't changed in 3 centuries. A city that smelled of horse dung, fresh bread, and wood smoke all at once, where the upper floors of buildings jutted so far over the street below that sunlight never reached the ground. And yet, this was the most exciting city on earth. 12 miles outside it stood Versailles, the most extravagant building in human history. Louis XIV had pulled the entire French aristocracy inside it, required to attend, required to compete, required to drain their fortunes on wigs and silk and the daily theater of royal favor. The Hall of Mirrors stretched 73 meters, 357 mirrors, at a time when a single mirror cost more than a skilled worker earned in a year. But 12 miles away, in the narrow streets of Paris, people were surviving on bread alone. 2 completely different worlds inside one city. And both of them were building towards something neither understood yet. 5 forces drove this city. The first was the Enlightenment. The cafés of the Palais-Royal were the internet of the 18th century, asking questions that had never been spoken out loud. What gives a king the right to rule? Their answers were published in the great encyclopédie, smuggled across borders, read by candlelight in secret, words so dangerous they were treated like weapons. And they were. The second was fashion. Paris dressed Europe. To be fashionable in the 18th century was to be French. The third was Les Halles, the great central market, feeding 600,000 people every day. The market women, the poissards, were legendary. Loud, fearless, politically aware. They knew the price of bread the way a stockbroker knows share prices. And when that price rose too high, they would be the first to march. Remember that. The fourth was the landmarks. Stand at the Pont Neuf, the oldest standing bridge in Paris, and every class in the city collides on the same stones, all of them brushing shoulders whether they wanted to or not. The Louvre, in the 1700s, was not yet a museum. Its courtyards had been taken over by squatters and craftsmen after the king left for Versailles, a building that belonged to everyone and no one. And the Bastille, a fortress holding people imprisoned by lettres de cachet, royal orders requiring no trial, no charge, no explanation. By 1789, it held only 7 prisoners. But it held something far more dangerous than prisoners. It held a symbol. And the fifth force, inequality so extreme, it defied logic. The nobility paid almost nothing. The church paid nothing. The peasants and urban poor paid everything. A farmer might surrender 80% of his harvest to taxes and dues and still go hungry, while Marie Antoinette spent the equivalent of millions on dresses and gambling in a single year. This was a city building toward an explosion, and the fuse was already lit. It built slowly, then all at once. The harvests of 1788 failed. Bread prices rose until a working family spent 90% of its income on bread alone, and still went hungry. That winter, the price of firewood tripled. In May 1789, Louis XVI called the Estates General for the first time in 175 years. France was bankrupt, partly from royal extravagance, partly from funding the American Revolution. France had helped America win freedom from a king and couldn't understand why its own people wanted the same thing. Louis thought he could raise taxes and send everyone home. Instead, the commoners refused to leave. They declared themselves a national assembly, and they swore an oath on a tennis court, the famous Serment du Jeu de Paume, that they would not disperse until France had a constitution. Louis wavered. Then he moved troops toward Paris. That was his mistake. On the 14th of July, 1789, the market women of Les Halles, the same women who had watched bread prices rise all year, led a crowd to the Bastille, not for the prisoners. Gravely, because it held gunpowder and the people of Paris needed weapons. The governor was seized. His head was cut off and paraded through the streets on a pike. In a single afternoon, the world that had existed in Paris for a century ended. Within days, the old world began to dissolve. The Declaration of the Rights of Man was written. Feudal privileges, centuries of inherited power, abolished in a single night of emotion in the National Assembly. Nobles stood up one after another and surrendered their privileges voluntarily, swept up in the moment. But the king still sat at Versailles, still surrounded by troops, still reluctant. Therefore, the market women decided to bring him home themselves. On the 5th of October, 1789, thousands of women marched 12 miles in the rain, from Paris to Versailles, armed with pikes and fury. They broke through the gates and nearly reached Marie Antoinette's bedroom. The next morning, the King of France was escorted back to Paris, not by soldiers, but by a crowd of market women who had simply decided he should live within sight of the people he was supposed to serve. Versailles fell silent. The Hall of Mirrors reflected nothing but empty rooms. So here is the answer to the question we asked at the start. How does the most powerful city in the world destroy itself from the inside? It doesn't. It destroys the version of itself that was built on a lie. The Paris that burned in 1789 was a city where 600,000 people existed to serve the comfort of a few thousand. When those 600,000 finally moved, the few thousand had nowhere left to stand. But the revolution didn't just tear things down, it built something new. The Louvre became a museum in 1793. Royal collections, locked away for centuries, suddenly belonging to everyone. The Pantheon became a monument to human achievement. Voltaire, who had spent his life mocking the institution it was built to glorify, was given the most honored tomb in France. The Declaration of the Rights of Man influenced the Haitian Revolution, Latin American independence, the American Bill of Rights. A document written in one Parisian summer rewrote the political DNA of the entire planet. The inequality built it, the ideas named it, the hunger triggered it, and the market women of Les Halles started it. Paris contained its own revolution inside it, like a seed. And when it finally grew, it changed everything, not just for Paris, for all of us. But Paris wasn't the only city carrying a revolution it didn't know about yet. Around the same time, on the other side of Europe, another city was sitting on a different kind of catastrophe, built from wind, water, and a storm nobody saw coming. If this made you see history differently, and subscribe. There is a lot more where this came from.